Welcome to Emotion Well, EFR's podcast about all things related to emotional wellness. I'm Johanna Dunlevy, the Wellness Manager for Employee and Family Resources, also known as EFR, and I'm the host of our podcast. As an FYI, EFR is located in Des Moines, Iowa, and we are Iowa's first employee assistance program and provide a variety of services you can learn more about at www.efr.org. I'm excited to be here today with Bronwyn Schweigert. She is a licensed psychotherapist and anger expert, and she has a podcast called Angry at the Right Things. Welcome to Emotion Well, Bronwyn.
Thank you, Johanna.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about the topic of anger because it's something that we haven't covered on Emotion Well, but it is an emotion and one that often prevails. So let's just kind of dig right in. But before we talk about anger, I'd like our listeners to learn a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a psychotherapist and this is my second career. I did not plan to become a psychotherapist. I didn't plan to get a second master's degree. I didn't see that coming. But as life would have it, I myself, about 15, 16 years ago, fell into a very severe depressive episode and I desperately needed a good therapist. And I couldn't find a good therapist. I sat on a lot of couches thinking to myself, Bronwyn, you are hardly functional right now, but I still think that you might make a better therapist than this person. So part of the healing journey from that depressive episode for me was going back to school and getting that master's and then getting those 3,000 hours to become a therapist. But in retrospect, what I realized from that depressive episode and then another more pernicious one that took place a year or so later after that, I started to realize, as a therapist myself, kind of connecting these dots, that my own depressive episodes were absolutely a result of my own suppressed or what I call disassociated anger.
Okay.
Both those times. And I saw in my clients, most of my clients have more anxiety than depression, but I started seeing this same phenomena where their anxiety, their panic attacks were really a result of their own suppressed anger, including mania, for people with bipolar, psychosis, for people with, hallucinations or delusions. So I really started putting all this together and realizing that we humans just really disassociate from anger. We don't disassociate from joy and really not from sadness. It's mainly anger because we were often conditioned very early in life to kind of associate our anger with maybe abandonment. So, if we're going through the terrible twos,
Sure.
and it's a necessary developmental phase for us to have boundaries with the parent and say, no, mine, me. And if mom, is old school, which hopefully is changing now, but she gives us the silent treatment as a way to, kind of quash that, our little brain is going to create a template where we associate our boundaries, our assertiveness, our anger with abandonment. And for a child, that is terrifying, terrifying to think about any type of abandonment. And we don't realize, oh, she's just giving us the silent treatment. We don't have the objectivity. And so we're going to just quash our own anger after that. Or we might associate anger with, shame. We get shamed for it. Sure. And we're not going to, do that again. And so those templates live in our brains for, the rest of our lives. And they really do, create our relationship with anger unless we kind of have an awakening where we start to realize this and then change it consciously.
Yeah. So when I got, the email from you about wanting to record a podcast about anger, I started thinking a little bit about my own relationship with anger, right? We all have emotions and we have relationships with our emotions. And someone told me once, like, you never get mad, you're never angry. And it's like, gosh, I am sometimes, but I do have a hard time showing it. Or I tend to show sadness more than I show anger. I also feel like I'm someone that has a high tolerance for certain things. And so anger isn't something that comes out of me like naturally or quickly, like it may some other people. But when you think about anger, and like I'm just thinking through kind of the labels that get associated with people who show and express anger. Oh, he's a hothead. She's a hothead,
Mhm.
right? Like that's like
Yeah,
the one that I heard as a kid. And
yeah.
then I did make that association. Like I'm just thinking about a person in the community where I resided, and I
Hmm.
would say that that person expressed anger. But I also remember my mom labeling him as a hothead, and to me
Hmm.
that was like a bad label. And so why would you want to be labeled as that? So I like what
Hmm.
you're saying as it relates to when we're children and we're learning different ways to respond and react in our world based on the feedback loop that we're getting from our parents and our loved ones. But I also think it's the observation too of people that do express anger,
Yeah, yeah.
and they get labeled as difficult or hotheads, and it's like,
Mhm.
well,
Yeah,
that's probably affecting me just as much as maybe some of the feedback I received. So
yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
curious, like, when you think of the spectrum of emotions,
Mhm.
do you feel like anger is just as prevalent as joy, sadness,
Mhm.
excitement, frustration?
Absolutely. So I wanted to kind of respond to the hothead thing because there are definitely those people who are just really angry all the time.
Hmm.
And, and they kind of are the ones who take up all the sensationalism and we associate, if I'm angry, I'm going to be like that person. So there are those people, and as a therapist, I would say those people, they are very, very angry, but not at the things that you're seeing them show the
Sure.
anger about. They're usually angry at something that happened to them very early on that
Hmm.
they've never worked through. And so it's like reactive anger.
Gotcha.
Um, and reactive anger isn't really based in reality. It's really reaction to their own dysfunction, their own emotions they haven't worked through. But there's also like, anger that's really based in truth. And so we really need to make that distinction. So that is imperative. Otherwise, we might just throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm not an angry person. I'm not a hothead, right?
Right.
But if someone is, hurting a child in front of you and you are not getting angry, that is a whole nother set of problems, right?
Sure.
So we need our anger. And I like to see anger, kind of there's two metaphors. One is it's a light on the dashboard of our car and it's saying, check under the hood.
Yeah.
Something is off,
Yes.
right? And so the goal isn't, we're not looking at the dashboard going, oh my God, that dashboard, it's so annoying. No, we're like, what's going on under the hood? Let's look. And I'm not going to, just abandon my car. I'm going to bring whatever it is to repair, to
Yeah.
resolve. And so if we can change our relationship with our anger, seeing it as if it is based in reality, it is working for us. It is a barometer of
Hmm.
something that we need to bring resolution to.
I love how you mentioned the check under the hood and the light on the dashboard, because over the years, I've been at EFR for 10 years and I've delivered a lot of presentations around different well-being topics, and stress is always a really popular topic that our employer groups request. And several years ago, I came up with this, like, what's your check engine light? Like we notice a
Mm.
check engine light or a warning light on the dash of our car, and we usually pay attention to it. And if we ignore it, what happens? Your car is probably going to break down, or you're going to have a massive repair, or you're going to run into some chronic issues with it. And I love when you said that, because it's so true. Like any emotion that kind of lights up and you notice it is a barometer for something. Okay, something's going on, something feels off, or I'm witnessing something that isn't right with me, or is wrong, or I'm just maybe lacking in self-care. I need to take a time out, I need to step back, whatever that emotion that's triggering the light is indicative of something going on inside of you. And so I like
Yeah.
how you said, anger is more of a barometer. And you're right. Like I also think about the times that I've probably suppressed anger. Um, and then I also have experienced different feelings that aren't super enjoyable, like resentment. So for me, a lot of the
Hmm.
times, if I don't get angry, I start to feel resentful. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm resentful towards a person or a situation that caused me to be angry. And then sometimes I'm feeling more resentful towards myself for not addressing the
Yes.
situation, or maybe I feel resentment towards myself because I should have been angry. I should have been angrier.
Mhm.
And I also think, there have been times in my life where I know I've upset people, and part of me has wondered, why aren't you angry with me? It's
Mm.
almost like it's like a feedback loop in a different way, right? Like I mean, I'm human. I've hurt people. And those people, I'm assuming, have felt some level of anger towards me, but it hasn't always been expressed as such. And so it's kind
Mm.
of confusing, right? It's like, well,
Mm.
did that not hurt them? Because I don't feel good
Mm.
about it. But I guess if they don't feel bad about it, I don't really need to make an amends, or I guess it just is what it is. I just think it's confusing when that emotion doesn't get
Yeah.
addressed.
Yes. Well, I want to say, I did a continuing education. I taught a continuing education course for therapists recently. And so I had to do a lot of research for the APA to approve that. They need a lot of research. And I actually had a ball doing the research. I had to kind of stop myself after a while, but there's so much interesting research right now where they actually are showing so many studies that show somatic issues, somatic illnesses related to suppressed anger. So, for the listeners, I'm going to just say there's a word for this that is called, it's a scientific term, alexithymia.
Okay.
So, and it's alexithymia, and what it means, what I like to, how I interpret it in kind of our vernacular is holding everything inside, what my clients call holding it inside. So that's the
Mhm.
word alexithymia. If we're going to
Yeah.
have a less scientific, definition of it. And that's usually anger, right?
Uh-huh.
That's for the most part, that's what we hold inside. So, and they've shown all these studies that people, even children who have more alexithymia, are more likely to have autoimmune disorders such as type 1 diabetes in young children, such as multiple sclerosis for women.
Hmm.
And they have more advancement of these autoimmune diseases than the people who are not alexithymic. So, for my clients, what I see is headaches. What I see is vertigo. What I see is, um, insomnia. That's a big
Hmm.
one. So I see digestive disorders. So I see all these. I myself have suffered very severe insomnia throughout my life. No longer, thank God. But yeah, all of these things, including even now autoimmune disorders, are linked to us suppressing our anger. So when you said you have resentment after, that's where I'm like, yeah, that's where we start to get sick. So we can either get sick, what we call physically, or mental illness again,
Sure.
anxiety, depression, all of these things. So we are not doing anyone any favors by keeping it all inside. And what I also want to say along with that is we need to change our perspective of what it means to show that anger. So I like to say emotion, the word emotion is mostly the word motion. That's because emotions want to elicit motion, they want to
Yeah.
move us. So
Yes.
if I'm feeling angry, I can just, let's say, Joanna, I'm feeling angry at you. I can just right now, I can just tell myself, I don't have to say anything to you. I would start with, you know what, Bronwyn? Yeah, I'm feeling angry right here in my chest. And that's okay. That is okay to feel because Johanna said that she was going to meet me at 9 a.m. and it's 9:20. And that's annoying. So I can just validate it for myself. So that's step number one.
So
Step number two,
self-validation, just
yes,
admitting to yourself the
yes.
emotion that you're feeling. I'm feeling
And
angry.
saying it's okay to feel. Because if we don't feel like it is okay, I'm not going to feel anger in my chest. I'm going to have anxiety, and it's always right here in the chest, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So look at what me validating and saying it's okay to feel is healing me even right now. That
Yeah.
first step. Okay. Step two is for me to say to myself, what does this anger want to do right now? Or what does it want to say? Well, it wants to say, Johanna, it's 9:20 and we said we would meet at 9 a.m. And this is like the third time this has happened. Okay. So let's say that's the case. That is me actually now channeling that anger out of my body
Hmm.
into words with you. Do you hear the anger? No, you just hear me kind of, confronting you,
Yeah,
but gently.
right.
Or, I could also say, if you're like my partner and you say something really snarky, I could channel that anger out of my body by saying, hey, that's not okay. That's me releasing my anger.
Yeah,
So it doesn't have to look like these hotheads that we associate it with.
right, right.
It can just be, hey, what's going on? Or hey, that's not okay.
Oh, I love that. I think, I mean, with any feeling or emotion, right, you could do that. And then I'm going to mispronounce it, alexithymia,
Thymia. Mm-hmm.
alexithymia. Is that specific to anger or any emotion that you might be holding in?
Well, they say all emotions, but I really think it's just anger because that's the one that we
That
humans hold
we
inside
suppress
more.
the most. And yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, most people when they're feeling joy, they're expressing it. I mean, they're not afraid to show it. So yeah, I see how it could apply to all emotions, but it's gonna apply to the emotions that are most commonly, held in, and anger would be one of
Yeah.
them. I like
Yeah.
the just taking that first step of saying, I'm feeling angry right now because someone was late to my meeting. And then, like you said, it doesn't have to come out as anger. It can come
Mhm.
out as, being assertive, being um transparent about how you feel. You
Yeah.
don't even have to use
Yeah.
the word I'm angry. Just say,
Yeah.
hey, you're late to our meetings and
Mhm.
it's starting to become, problematic and, I'm losing trust in your ability to show up on time. I mean, you don't even have to say you're angry. Do you feel like once you admit that you're angry to yourself, your anger levels just start to decrease? Like that barometer, it just starts to change.
When you validate it, yes, like that self validation for me to say, you know what? It is okay to feel this. Yes, that is imperative. That is step one. And yes, I do feel like I can breathe.
Hmm.
I feel calmer just validating it for myself. So the other thing I want to say with that is we can also channel the anger through boundaries. Like that's a common one. And we can do it with accountability. Um,
Hmm.
so with a boss, I might not be able to be assertive with that person directly, but I can document like all these microaggressions that I'm experiencing and I can go above his head and bring accountability to
Sure.
him. So we can do that and we need to do that because if we don't do those things, we will get sick. And what I see with my clients is the people who suffer most are the people who are not the toxic people. They're the people who are around the toxic people who
Yeah.
are not being true to themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address, so when we first started the conversation, you mentioned how we're often conditioned as very young children to, hold our anger
Mm-hmm.
in. We have a lot of people that listen to this podcast who are parenting young children.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an 8-year-old. So, I mean, I'm several years away from the terrible twos, but what would you say to people that are engaging with young children on a regular basis, whether they're parenting them or grandparenting
Mm-hmm.
or,
Yeah.
working in a daycare setting or a school setting? What would be some supportive techniques or approaches, when a child might be acting out or
Yeah.
doing things that kids do, having a meltdown? That's a normal human response to being tired, to being hungry, to not getting what you want. They just haven't learned how to regulate their emotions as well as an
Yeah.
adult in that moment. So, what would you say to someone who is around those young kids, and how can we support them so that they grow up to be adults who can have the tools to feel anger and express anger in a healthy way?
Well, I would say first and foremost, we need to be a healthy adult who
Yeah.
models that for them. And that is by using our words. So we can tell a kid to use their words, but until we model it by using our words, that's not going to go far because 99% of teaching isn't what we tell kids to do, it's what they see us do. But yeah, so we use our words and we say, Johnny, I see that you're doing this and that, whatever the acting out behavior. And we start to see behavior is a language.
Hmm.
And we interpret as the adult, we interpret that language. I see that you are really angry, with how you are, not talking to mommy right now. And, I don't blame you because mommy said no to that cookie. And it's okay to be angry. I don't
Hmm.
blame you. I bet you really want that cookie. That's hard. It doesn't mean you're going to get the cookie, but
Right.
I can validate that's hard and I don't blame you. And you can just use your words and say, Mommy, I don't like that. That makes me angry. And I'll say, I get it, Johnny.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. Let's work together to figure out what we can do to bring a resolution to this, if that's a possibility, right? So we work with them. We always validate their anger. We name the feelings we're seeing them behave. So we're putting them into words. So this is called the name it to tame it
Okay.
technique. So when we name those feelings for a kid, it actually calms. And for an adult, it calms the right hemisphere of the brain to have the feeling named. So when we say,
Okay.
I see you're frustrated, or I see you're annoyed, or I see you're angry. It calms them down. It's validating it for them.
Hmm.
And and then we, just say that's okay. There's no right or wrong feeling. Feelings aren't good or bad or right or wrong. They're not even voluntary. They're involuntary. So we
Right.
don't
They
judge.
exist. Yeah.
We don't judge feelings, but we can judge behavior because we have
Hmm.
choices of our behavior, but we're going to help our children's behaviors by helping calm them down. And that's our job to regulate them by naming those
Yeah.
feelings.
I was also told once by a counselor, I was just talking about, at the time I was parenting, she might have been 4 or 5 years old. It's been a few years, but connect before you correct. Like connect
Mm-hmm.
with, your daughter before you correct her behavior. Like try to connect like with how she's feeling. And I like the name it to tame it. And you can do that
Mm-hmm.
by connecting or validating their feelings. But I do think, and it's hard. Like, I mean, no one is going to be perfect all of the time. I mean, right? Like I've been frustrated and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
not able to in that moment connect before I correct. I kind of
Well,
want to jump right into that. So it's a
well,
practice. It's like a muscle
let
you have
me
to kind of flow.
address for you, Johanna, your job is to say, you know what? I'm frustrated with you, kiddo. And
Yeah.
that's what parents oftentimes I feel like they're not learning that piece. A lot of the newer parenting techniques are great. They're helping validate the child's anger. But what they're not teaching the parent is that we can say to them, Johnny, mommy's really frustrated with your
Hmm.
behavior right now.
Hmm.
And we need to say that because what we're doing when we're naming our feelings, especially like our anger, validating their feelings, we're teaching them implicitly, Johnny, your feelings matter. And guess what? My feelings matter too. Everyone's feelings matter. And we really need to do that. So, and our kids are going to do well with that.
Hmm.
So for me to say to my daughter, Edie, I am so annoyed right now. I've asked you to move this, 3 times now, and it hasn't been done. So, or we can say, that's frustrating. That's also helpful to just say, that's annoying. That's frustrating. So we're not attacking. We're not like, you always do this. No,
Right.
you. Just like, that's annoying, and that's it. That's all we need to say. But they do need to hear our own frustration too,
Yeah.
that we matter.
Yeah, and see us as beings with feelings as well. Like, they have their feelings, I have my, she has her feelings, I have my feelings. One thing I do say often is, I'm so frustrated right now. Frustration is a feeling that I often do express out loud. I'm so frustrated right now. I've asked you to not leave food
Mm-hmm.
in your bedroom. So we're going
Yeah.
to have some consequences if you continue to do that. Um, I
Yeah.
think that I don't know, and I love the movie Inside Out. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Yeah.
there's Inside
Uh-huh.
Out and Inside Out 2, and my daughter loves those movies. And I just love how they show, that one person can have a variety of emotions at any time, and those emotions are sometimes competing, with each other to prevail and be expressed. And so I love that. And then I think about the emotion, anger as it's depicted in the movie, and it is like a little hothead. Yeah, he's like a short little red character in his house
Yeah,
on fire. So
yeah.
it kind of fits that stereotype. Tell me more about your podcast and how people can connect with you to learn more about this topic, because I know we're just scratching the surface on this, and you have a podcast with a lot of great episodes that people can dive into if they want to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. So my podcast is Angry at the Right Things. And yeah, I have like over 50 episodes now. I'm trying to make them shorter. I do have like my older ones are much longer, but
So what do you mean by like
yeah,
what's shorter for you?
maybe 10 to 15
Okay.
minutes
So like little
probably. And then
snippets. Okay.
yeah. But I talk about, all of this anger, but also a lot of shame, because shame is another feeling. It's not an emotion, but it's a feeling that really can debilitate our relationship,
Yeah.
us developing a healthy relationship with anger and with ourselves. So yeah, shame as well as hatred, that's something I've been talking about more, and kind of like really distinguishing what these feelings are and what we should, how we should develop a relationship for these feelings, because humans are complex. We can feel love and hate towards the same person
Mhm.
all at once. And we, to be integrated people, I always say that the goal of therapy, or the goal of, us individuals, is to become integrated people, because an integrated person is a whole person, just like an integral number is a
Mhm.
whole number. So it means like complete, it means mature. And to be integrated, we are not in denial of any of our feelings, but we are working our feelings in harmony with our mind, our intellect, and our body to be true to ourselves. And so when we are acknowledging our feelings, validating them, and then channeling them in healthy ways, allowing them to move us towards health, we become really integrated people who are free, who learn to trust ourselves, who learn to be true to ourselves. And we're not in denial of anything, which makes us healthy people, because,
Yeah.
we're not getting these mental illnesses or physical illnesses from the alexithymia.
Yeah, I think what you said about learning to trust yourself, and I love that, because I think so often we've been taught not to trust ourselves, or that, the way we're feeling isn't right, or there's shame, that
Yeah.
feeling of shame influences the emotions that we want to express, or we allow ourselves to express. And so I think trusting yourself, it's again, is something that will take some work, right? But with the right resources and support and practice, I think is something that people can kind of flex like they would flex a muscle. So I love this, and I'm excited to dive into some of your podcasts. I like that they're shorter. I think especially now people tend to listen to things when they're on the go. You might be driving to work and you only have 10 to 15 minutes to get from
Yeah.
point A to point B. So it's nice to be able to listen to something in its entirety versus an episode that stretches over an hour, and you're kind of
Yeah.
picking it up in pieces here and there. So thank you so much for being on Emotion Well. And I will link in our show notes to your Psychology Today profile, as well as the podcast, Angry at the Right Things. So thank you so much, Bronwyn, for all of your advice today. And I'm excited for our listeners to dig into your episodes.
You're welcome, Johanna. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Emotion Well. Employee and Family Resources, or EFR, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization located in Des Moines, Iowa. We support communities, workplaces, and schools with comprehensive behavioral health services. If you would like to contribute to our mission, please click on the donation link in our show notes.